Hello, and welcome to another video. Today, I will be giving you a tour of probably the strangest EDH deck I've ever built. Let's get started. So this deck was built as part of a challenge that was issued to my EDH playgroup just for fun, and it was built around two monocolored commanders, Ilharg the Raze-Boar and Anafenza. But outside of the challenge, in order to make this a legal EDH deck, I do have some Boros legendary creatures, any of which could be used as the commander. Doesn't really matter which. I think it will make the most sense if I explain first what the challenge was, because there's probably some pretty strange card choices in here. So I'll give you the context around how this deck was made. So the challenge for my playgroup was for each player to design and build a deck within 2 hours. So it had to all be made up of cards that you already own, and no borrowing cards from other decks was allowed. We were able to pick any 2 commanders and build the deck as though they had the partner keyword on them, which is actually kind of funny, I think, because we did this probably over 2 years ago now, and the Commander Masters draft product had pretty much the same rule as long as you had 2 monocolored commanders. So that's kind of interesting. Going into this challenge, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to have available on hand for cards. So I wrote up a spreadsheet of probably 150 to 200 cards that could potentially go in the deck, and then the rest of the 2-hour time limit was just frantically searching around trying to locate as many of those cards as I could until I got to 100, and attempting to build the most cohesive deck that I could from what we had. No taking apart decks of any kind that were already built. So, like I said, there are some kind of strange choices in here. I have not changed anything about this deck since it was built. I know there's definitely at least 1 white border card in here, and some weird promos and things that happened to be the only copy of a particular card that wasn't already in use. But I'll probably go through this at some point in the future and start making changes to it. Maybe return some of the cards back to the binders where they belong, and things like that. But anyway, when I started building the deck, I knew right away that I wanted Ilharg as one of my partners. So he is a 6/6 red boar god for 5 with trample, and whenever he attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. And then, when he dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put him into your library third from the top. So I really wanted to try and build a deck with a lot of creatures that had an effect when they entered the battlefield, so that I could really go to town with that pseudo dash ability. And for the other commander, I ended up going with Anafenza, which is a 2/2 spirit soldier for 2 that has, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, bolster 1. So the bolster ability can only target the creature with the least toughness among creatures you control, and it can be a little tricky if the creature with the least toughness is the one that you are putting out just temporarily from Ilharg, so that +1/+1 counter kind of gets wasted. But Anafenza herself is pretty small, and there are some creatures that leave behind some smaller tokens, and you will still be casting creatures regularly, so still a relevant ability. Let's take a look through the rest of the deck. One of the real commander options we have is Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. She is a 5/5 angel with flying and first strike. If a source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, that source deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. And if a source would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent half that damage rounded up. And then we have Velomachus Lorehold. It is a 5/5 Elder Dragon with flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever it attacks, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to his power from among them without paying its mana cost, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then we have Erois, God of Victory, which is a 7/4 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible, and as long as your devotion to red and white is less than 7, Erois isn't a creature. Creatures you control can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures, and prevent all damage that would be dealt to attacking creatures you control. So, none of these multicolored cards necessarily contribute directly to the theme of the deck, but I still think they're pretty useful to have, and any of them can do a pretty good job if they need to step up to become the commander of the deck. I think Aroas would be my pick as the commander, since he is the cheapest of the options, and I think his abilities are really good even when he's just an enchantment, and does a really good job of protecting your attacking creatures, which is ultimately the goal of this deck. So I would be happy to have Aroas as my commander when needed. As I mentioned, the overall plan of this deck is to have a lot of creatures with enters the battlefield abilities, so that they can be repeated by Ilharg every turn. And so I have them kind of grouped together here depending on what the effect is. First up is Bogarden Hellkite. It is a 5/5 dragon with flash and flying, and when it comes into play, it deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and/or players. Demanding Dragon is a 5/5 dragon with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target opponent unless that player sacrifices a creature. Fury is a 3/3 elemental incarnation with double strike. When Fury enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and/or planeswalkers, and can be evoked by exiling a red card from your hand. Flametongue Kavu is a 4/2 Kavu that when it enters the battlefield deals 4 damage to target creature. Inferno Titan is a 6/6 giant with an activated ability of red. Inferno Titan gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and whenever Inferno Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures and/or players. We have Thundermaw Hellkite, a 5/5 dragon with flying and haste, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature with flying your opponent's control and taps those creatures. Ingot Chewer is a 3/3 elemental that destroys target artifact when it enters the battlefield and has evoke for 1 red. Zealous Conscripts is a 3/3 human warrior with haste. When it enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent until end of turn. Untap it, and it gains haste until end of turn. Cavalier of Dawn is a 4/6 elemental knight with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, destroy up to one target non-land permanent, and its controller creates a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token. When Cavalier of Dawn dies, return target artifact or enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. Linvala the Preserver is a 5/5 angel with flying. When she enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more life than you gain 5 life, and if an opponent controls more creatures than you, put a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Knight of the White Orchid is a 2/2 human knight with first strike. When Knight of the White Orchid enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Blade Splicer is a 1/1 human artificer. When it enters the battlefield, put a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token onto the battlefield, and golem creatures you control have first strike. Sun Titan is a 6/6 giant with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Karmic Guide is a 2/2 angel spirit with flying, protection from black, and echo for 3 and 2 white. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Godo, Bandit Warlord, is a 3/3 human barbarian. When Godo, Bandit Warlord comes into play, you may search your library for an equipment card and put it into play. If you do, shuffle your library. And whenever it attacks for the first time each turn, untap it and all samurai you control. After this phase, you get an additional combat phase. That is mostly in here for the equipment fetching. And there's only a few pieces of equipment. And no samurai, I don't think. And then there are some creatures in here where the intention was sort of to be able to blink creatures that were brought into play with Ilharg, so that you can trigger the enters the battlefield ability one more time, and then have them come back into play as a new entity so that they can stick around. So kind of a way to cheat your creatures into play if you can. So we have Restoration Angel, which is a 3/4 angel with flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile target non-angel creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. Flicker Wisp is a 3/1 elemental with flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Eldrazi Displacer is a 3/3 Eldrazi with Devoid. 2 and a colorless. Exile another target creature, then return it to the battlefield, tapped under its owner's control. Angel of Condemnation is a 3/3 angel with flying and vigilance. It has 2 white tap to exile another target creature, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, and 2 white tap, exert Angel of Condemnation, exile another target creature until Angel of Condemnation leaves the battlefield. And then on the other side of things, we have Spite Bellows, a 6/1 elemental. When Spite Bellows leaves the battlefield, it deals 6 damage to target creature and has Evoke for 1 and 2 red. And then I believe starting here, we are no longer necessarily on theme, but these are good creatures to have in a deck like this. So we have Perforos Bronze Blooded, a 7/6 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible as long as your devotion to red is less than 5. Perforos isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have haste, and for 2 and a red, you may put a red creature card or an artifact card from your hand onto the battlefield, then sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Urabrask the Hidden is a 4/4 Praetor with creatures you control have haste, and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Anger is a 2/2 incarnation with haste, and as long as he's in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. We have the other Perforos, God of the Forge, a 6/5 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible, and as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a creature, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Perforos deals 2 damage to each opponent. And then for 2 and a red, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. we have Torbran, Thane of Red Fell, a 2/4 dwarf noble. If a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. And our last creature is Blightsteel Colossus, an 11/11 golem with trample, infect, and indestructible. And if Blightsteel Colossus would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, reveal it and shuffle it into its owner's library instead. I did feel a little mean putting this in the deck, but I really couldn't resist with Ilharg and getting to put this out and surprise someone by forcing them to deal with it or leave the game, I guess. Alright. From here on out, I'll go through the remaining cards much more quickly. A lot of this stuff is just pretty standard EDH fare, so nothing too remarkable, probably. So I'll just show you what I have. Classic Lightning Bolt, a Braid, Mizzium Mortars, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Condemn, Generous Gift, a very ugly Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, Cast Out, Fervor, Berserker's Onslaught, Dictate of the Twin Gods, Outpost Siege, and possibly actually putting this one on dragons so that you can deal a damage to something every time one of your creatures leaves the battlefield. Sarkhan's Unsealing. Onto our artifacts, we have Wayfarer's Bauble, Mind Stone, Soul Ring, Hedron Archive, Darksteel Ingot, Boros Signet, Fire Diamond, Pyromancer's Goggles, Commander's Sphere, Caged Sun, Quicksilver Amulet, Hammer of Perforos, Panharmonicon, and Strionic Resonator, Swiftfoot boots, lightning greaves, a whisper silk cloak, helm of the host, another way to try and get those ETB triggers to happen. And then for land, we have a myriad landscape, temple of the false god, Nykthos, shrine to Nyx, Sunhome, fortress of the Legion, Reliquary Tower, Rogue's Passage, Idyllic Grange, Castle Ardenvale, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, Needleverge Pathway, or Pillarverge Pathway, Castle Embereth, Sacred Foundry, Clifftop Retreat, Sundown Pass, Temple of Triumph, and then all of our basics. And there we have it. Thank you so much for joining me today for this strange and not quite legal challenge EDH deck. I very much appreciate you sticking with me, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Do you have any suggestions for changes I should consider making? Is there a commander that I should consider specifically for this type of strategy? Things like that. I'm curious to know. And of course, please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new Magic the Gathering ASMR videos every Monday and Friday. But that is all for today. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.